Ella Fitzgerald did not give compliments casually. This was not a quality unique to her, but it was a quality she had in exceptional measure. She had been in music since 1934, when she had won an amateur night competition at the Apollo Theater in Harlem at the age of 17, and had been offered a week's engagement by the band leader Chick Webb on the basis of what she did in that single performance. From that week forward, and for the following 5 decades, she had been one of the most performed and most studied voices in the history of American music. She had recorded over 200 albums. She had performed in every major venue on every continent. She had been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and more Grammy Awards than it is useful to enumerate, and the specific honor that exists beyond all official recognitions, which is that musicians who heard her speak about her voice as the standard against which they measured their own. She had been in music for 35 years when she walked into the ABC television studio in Los Angeles to appear on This Is Tom Jones. She had heard, in those 35 years, most of the things that the 20th century's popular music was capable of producing. She had formed opinions. She had kept most of them to herself, which is the prerogative of a person who has heard enough to understand that opinions are less useful than ears, and that the ears, properly maintained, do not require opinions to supplement them. But the compliment she gave you, when she gave you one, meant something. Because she had heard everything, and because she knew what she had heard, and because the specific thing she said to you was not the thing she said to everyone, but the thing she had concluded, in the silence after the music stopped, about you specifically. When Ella Fitzgerald appeared on This Is Tom Jones, the program that had been bringing together the separate worlds of popular music under a single Welsh roof since 1969, there was a quality to the day that the production staff noted and did not entirely know how to describe. She was 62 years old, and she was in the specific condition of a voice that has been maintained through decades of discipline, still extraordinary, operating at a level that made the studio musicians sit differently at their instruments, still capable of producing the particular effect that Ella Fitzgerald's voice had always produced, which was the effect of hearing something that had been thought through so completely that the thinking had disappeared, and what remained was simply the music. She brought to the room the specific authority of a voice that had earned its authority through the only available means, being right about music, consistently, for 35 years, in front of audiences and peers who had been paying close attention. She said something after Tom Jones sang. The floor manager was moving toward Ella to begin the transition to the next segment of the taping when she said it. The floor manager stopped. The musicians who caught it turned toward each other. Tom Jones, standing at the microphone, received it in the particular way he received things that mattered, with a quality of still attention that was uncommon in him, and that the people who worked with him over the years came to recognize as a sign that something had landed somewhere deep. What she said was this: that the note he had just hit, the high note in the bridge, the one that the arrangement had built toward and that everything following it depended on, was not something that could be practiced into existence. She said that note was either there or it wasn't. She said she had heard a great many performers attempt that note, and that most of them arrived at it technically and left the room intact. She said Tom Jones had arrived at it the other way, and that the room had not been intact afterward. Ella Fitzgerald had heard a great many people sing. She had spent 35 years forming opinions about what voices contained and what they were incapable of. The opinion she formed about Tom Jones, stated in one sentence in a television studio in Los Angeles while a floor manager waited to move the schedule forward, was that the room had changed. That was the sentence. That was the whole of it. Tom Jones did not say anything immediately. He was 31 years old, and he had been told by audiences of thousands, and by industry professionals, and by the chart positions, and by the Las Vegas booking contracts, that he was a significant performer. He had been told this in many forms and in many rooms, and with varying degrees of sincerity. The Las Vegas contracts told him in the language of money. The chart positions told him in the language of numbers. The screaming audiences told him in a language that was genuine, but that was also, in the way of crowds, not entirely specific to him. The crowd at a Tom Jones concert was responding to something large and powerful and immediate, but the crowd was not, in the way Ella Fitzgerald was, identifying the precise thing inside the largeness and the power and the immediacy that made it different from other large and powerful and immediate things. He had been told that he was significant. He had not previously been told what was significant about him, with that particular precision, by that particular person, in that particular sentence. There was also the matter of what she had not said. She had not said that Tom Jones was a great pop singer. She had not said he was a great Las Vegas performer or a great television host or one of the great commercial successes of his generation. She had said the room changed. This was a different category of statement. It placed him in a tradition that had nothing to do with the chart positions or the showroom bookings or the television ratings. The tradition of voices that do something to the physical space around them, something that the technical vocabulary of popular music does not have adequate language for, something that Ella Fitzgerald had spent 35 years recognizing and had learned to name simply, because the simple name was the most accurate one available. Tom Jones stood at the microphone and received this. The room that had just changed was very quiet for a moment. The floor manager waited. The musicians waited. The whole organized machinery of a television production held still, while a Welsh man in his early 30s took in what he had just been told by the greatest voice in American popular music. He thanked her. He said something in response that the accounts of the day do not preserve with precision. Whatever he said, she nodded once, the specific nod of a person confirming that the exchange has been completed as intended. And the floor manager, released, began moving the schedule forward again. The sentence was short. It was specific. It was not a general statement about Tom Jones's voice, or his career, or his Las Vegas residencies, or his television ratings. It was about a single note. It was about what happened when Tom Jones reached for a particular note and the note arrived, and what that specific event communicated to a woman who had spent 35 years listening to voices and who had concluded, long ago, that the way a voice reached for a difficult note told you everything you needed to know about what the voice was made of. Tom Jones in 1969 was 31 years old and at the full peak of what his voice could accomplish in purely technical terms. The range fully developed, the power fully controlled, without being controlled away from expressiveness. The instrument being used as completely as it was possible to use it. He had come to this peak by a route that did not pass through the formal training that most voices of that quality received. He had no conservatory. He had no master teacher. He had the Welsh choral tradition and the working men's clubs of Pontypridd, and a decade and a half of performing in rooms of increasing size, each room demanding more of the voice than the last, and the voice, each time, providing it. The instrument had been educated by use, which is one of the oldest and, in some respects, the most reliable educational systems available. What this produced was a voice that was technically accomplished without being technically derived, a voice that solved its technical problems intuitively, by feel and by instinct rather than by method, which meant that the solutions it found were sometimes more interesting than the solutions that method would have arrived at. Ella Fitzgerald, who had received the formal training and who had also supplemented it with the same education by use that Tom Jones had, understood this distinction. She had heard the difference between a technically trained voice and a voice that had trained itself through the only available means, which was experience, and she knew which she was hearing. She had also, by 1969, arrived at the stage in a career that the best performers arrive at, which is the stage where technique becomes invisible, and what remains is simply the voice and what it does with the music. Ella Fitzgerald had arrived at that stage herself and had spent those decades refining her understanding of what it looked like in other people. She was at the show that day as a guest. She was also, without being asked to be, as close to an objective measurement of a voice as popular music had. If Ella Fitzgerald thought something about what you did, the opinion was not sentimental, was not driven by commercial considerations, was not shaped by the categories the press had built around you. It was an assessment. It was accurate. She had spent her career being generous to other performers. She was not a small person in either the literal or the figurative sense, and she did not carry a small person's need to diminish others. But generosity and accuracy were different things, and when she was being accurate rather than merely generous, the people around her could tell. What she said about Tom Jones that day was accurate. It had the quality of a statement that comes from somewhere beyond courtesy. The distinction was not small. He carried it. He would carry it for decades. Not because it was the only recognition he had received, but because it was the specific kind of recognition that came from a peer of that particular experience and authority. The kind of recognition that could not be purchased or manufactured or produced by the machinery of celebrity. It arrived from a woman who had been listening to voices for 35 years and who knew, in the silence after the music, exactly what she had heard. In the years that followed, Tom Jones continued performing. He continued across Las Vegas residencies and television specials and concert tours and recording sessions, and all the forms that a career of that size takes as it extends through decades. He went through the periods that long careers go through, the periods of visibility and the periods of reduced visibility, and the reinventions and the returns. And through all of it, the voice remained, doing the thing that Ella Fitzgerald had named in one sentence in a television studio in Los Angeles. The room changed, every room he sang in. Not every room every night. There were nights that were professional, accomplished, below the level of the thing she had identified. But the capacity was always there, the ability to arrive at the difficult note the other way, not through technical accuracy, but through whatever the voice had inside it that made the note real rather than correct. This was the thing Ella Fitzgerald had heard and named. This was the thing she had considered worth naming, which meant it was rare, which meant it was worth something beyond what the chart positions and the booking contracts could measure. He had been 31 years old when she said it. He would sing for 50 more years. And somewhere in all of those years, in the rooms where the note arrived and the room changed, was the echo of an afternoon in 1969 when the person with the best ears in the history of American popular music had listened to him sing and had told him exactly what she heard. She had been right. About the note, about the room, about all of it. She had been right the first time, and the room had kept proving it right ever since. Ella Fitzgerald died in 1996. Tom Jones sang at her memorial in tribute. The accounts of that tribute describe him singing with a specific quality of attention that went beyond the professional, singing the way he sang when something mattered, which was the way Ella Fitzgerald had recognized, in a single sentence in a television studio in Los Angeles more than 25 years before, was the only way he knew how to sing. The room, as always, changed. She had known it would. She had heard it the first time, and had told him so, and the intervening decades had been nothing but the extended proof of her accuracy. The voice that had not been formally trained, that had been educated by use in the working men's clubs and the Las Vegas showrooms and every room in between, had kept doing the thing she named. It had kept changing the rooms. It had kept arriving at the difficult notes the other way. That was the whole of it. That was what she had heard in a television studio on an afternoon in 1969, and that was what she had considered worth stating in one sentence, and that was what he had carried for the rest of his life. The room changed. 3 words, the truest assessment his voice ever received.